We all know that attention is probably the most valuable resource that we have access to as journalists and as people who care about the future of journalism. So I'll try to be a good steward of your attention along with my fellow panelists. My name is Rasmus Nielsen, and I'm director of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford. And I'm going to be sort of kicking off this panel on what's next for the business of news, where we have a great panelist of people who, after I have identified some of the problems, will tell you all about all the solutions, if you will, or some versions of different solutions to this sort of question of, how do we think about the economic and business foundations of the practice of journalism? So I think all of us are in awe of all the panels we've heard at this festival, and more broadly what we see of these really impressive examples of incredibly important and inspiring journalism that's been done around the world. Sometimes just really important revelations in free societies that hold power to account, whether it's private companies like Facebook or elected officials or private individuals like Harvey Weinstein or others who are held to account by journalists, or for that matter, our colleagues around the world who do this in far more challenging environments and faced with far greater pressures than those most of us have ever encountered ourselves, sometimes sadly even within the European Union itself. But of course, we also realize that what underlies all of this impressive journalism is the fact that journalism is a professional work, and that we want that work to be paid so that people can actually do it, so that journalists have the resources, the time, the wherewithal to pursue their mission of seeking truth and reporting it and trying to hold power to account. And I suppose that the starting assumption of this panel is the idea that that business is changing very rapidly, not always for the better, very often for the worse, and that journalists need to be part of the conversation about the future of the business of news that sustains the profession. The alternative to being part of that conversation is that other people have it, and those other people will make decisions based on other priorities than those we have as journalists or people who care about journalism. So I think we know that we've moved very quickly from a world in which the business of news was very crudely put based on low choice for consumers, publishers having high market power over advertisers, and a bundled product where everything came in a single package that was very profitable for those who dominated the mass media environment, to a very different environment today where consumers have very high choice. As a consequence, publishers have very low market power over advertisers, and most things have been unbundled and then sort of rebundled by the platform companies who increasingly dominate the digital media environment. And it's a basic sort of fact of economics, if you will, that change will lead to lower revenues and slimmer margins, and in many cases to job cuts or more reduced resources for journalism. And I think we have to be realistic about what the public is telling us about how they value journalism as we do it today, and what their revealed preference is for what we do and what we believe in, but where we also have to be sensitive to what the public demonstrates that they value, for example, through their attention. So in Western markets, if you look at all the time that people spend with digital media, it's estimated that only about 3% of that time is spent with all news and information providers combined. 3%. And we shouldn't expect long-term news share of advertising to be much larger than the share of attention. So that world in which the advertising money just rolled in that could fund large newsrooms, that is the world of yesterday. It's not the world we live in. It's not the world we're going to live in the future. And we see more and more organizations think about what that means for advertising-funded models, or whether there are alternative models that they want to pursue, whether we're thinking about reader revenues from subscriptions or membership models of various sorts. And we see by now, I suppose we can say, proof of concept that at least a significant minority of people are willing to pay for things they consider to be truly outstanding quality journalism, but they're not going to pay for much, 1 or 2 subscriptions, and there is a lot of journalism that they come across that they clearly do not think is worth paying for from their point of view. And we might find all this uncomfortable, but fundamentally, if we believe that the task of journalism is to seek truth and report it, and confront us as citizens and powerful institutions with truth, even if it's uncomfortable, I think we too should be prepared to face these truths, even if they are uncomfortable. And if we don't take on these challenges, I think in the profession as set, we need to remember that does not mean that these conversations are not happening. If we don't think about the future of the business that sustains and constrains journalism, other people will make those decisions. Whether they're proprietors or managers or others, if you are not at the table, the conversation will still happen, decisions will still be made, but you have no voice in it then. And the consequences of this hollowing out of the business, and in some cases the lack of innovation, is not simply job cuts, as we've seen in many countries around the world. I think at least equally troublingly, we also see how journalism around the world is becoming very vulnerable to various forms of media capture, as proprietors or people who control large advertising budgets, whether these are states or private companies, increasingly seek to exercise influence over news organizations, in part through their commercial clout. So if we want to defend the independence of journalism and its ability to seek truth and report it, we need to think about the resources, where they're going to come from, and how can we raise those resources in a way that's sustainable and allow us to retain our independence of any one given interest in society and continue the mission that all of you are invested in as professional journalists. So to kick off that conversation, I'm very glad that we have, I think, a wide range of different people who are leading this process of change in different ways, from strong editorial principles in different contexts around the world and very different models. There's not one answer to this set of questions or these set of challenges, but many possible answers, many different responses. And I'll ask each of them to speak briefly about their general approach to this question of what they believe is next for the business of news in the case of their company. And then we'll have a conversation where I'll ask people to engage a bit with each other here in the panel before we open it up for questions and comments from the floor. So I'll turn first to Ritu Kapur, who is co-founder and CEO of Quintillion Media, also known for the Quint, and then next to Rosan and Tom after that. But Ritu, first, over to you.
Hi, thanks Rasmus. You know, a year back, I would constantly keep saying that eventually it's all going to be ad revenue, and once the advertisers see where the audience is, the advertisers will turn to those platforms, and those platforms willy-nilly will be digital and on handheld devices. But that's clearly a year old. And the story is out there, right? Ad revenue is only going to be a percentage of your revenue source. So this is the closest that one can come to crystal ball gazing, really, because one can only sort of project and guess and imagine how the reader is going to respond to quality content. So that's the forerunner, right? That's the given, that you have to be differentiated, quality, credible news content and journalism to then turn to the readers and the users to provide this, either through subscriptions or through membership models or through contributions. So we are at the Quint. We have so far been entirely ad revenue driven. We're obviously nowhere near breaking even, and we don't see ourselves breaking even for a while yet. We have along with the Quint, we have Bloomberg Quint, which is in a joint venture with Bloomberg, which is a corporate and financial and business portal. We experimented in December last year with a fairly tough paywall. We have, just 7 articles, and then the paywall kicks in. And we were very skeptical, actually, because our subscription rates were pretty high by India standards. And the story's not been too grim, actually. The story's, in less than 2 months, we're hitting close to 5,000 subscribers for a 2-year subscription, and about 5,000. So the model is sort of, you can subscribe for a year, you can subscribe for 2 years, or you can subscribe per. It's a micro subscription where you can subscribe per article. We find that there's an equal interest in the two-year subscription and in the subscription per article. But on the Quint, so the Bloomberg Quint is a financial corporate product, so it's slightly more niche, and its audience is obviously more prime and more inclined to pay up for prime content. The Quint is all news, political news, and it's slightly millennial focused. Now it's sort of also reaching out to an older audience. But we don't have the confidence to put that behind a paywall yet. But we do several things that we thought since we are very engaged with some of those initiatives with our readers, we decided to reach out to them about 5 days back to see if they're willing to contribute towards a membership model. So what do? We have a citizen journalism platform, which we call My Report, which is a win-win for us because we're able to get stories from fairly deep interiors of India, which we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get through the citizen journalism model. But more than that, we're able to get a fairly deep engagement with our readers. And we have a disinformation fact-checking hand where also we opened ourselves to our readers, because in India, a lot of the fake news or disinformation or misinformation is actually spreading through WhatsApp, which virtually works like the dark web. And so we thought that the only way to reach out to that content is to ask our readers to share with us anything that is suspect. And and through that, we actually built a very deep relationship with some of our readers and a relationship of trust. And of course, and the third thing that we do is we do our special projects, which is sort of fairly deep dive documentary content. So we packaged all of this, and we've asked our readers if they would like to contribute towards these 3 special initiatives that we do. And the response, at least in the last 3 days or 4 days, has not been, well, it's been encouraging. Now, the question is, will this sustain us? So it'll be a mixed model between ad revenue. I don't think we can look away from that. I think we need to empower our solutions that we're going to our advertisers, our brand agencies with in terms of tech solutions. I think just going back to advertisers with more and more here, we can do an article, we can do a video. I don't think that's going to be, a solution for very long. I think we have something that we call the Quint Lab, where we are actually working on innovating on solutions for advertisers. So that's one area. This membership or contribution model for our special initiatives, which involve the reader, is the second one. And the third one that we are thinking of rolling out is to pay for an ad-free model. Where we go from here, we'll know in about a year, I think.
I mean, just one thing that's striking is just the pace of change at the Quint, which I've followed quite closely since the launch. I mean, some of the pivots you describe have taken years at other companies, so experimentation has been lively. Rosan, I'm going to turn to you next. I mean, the Correspondent too is, like Quint, is digital born, but it's a different model from what Ritu describes from her work in India. So tell us about how you're thinking about the business of that at the Correspondent.
So yeah, my name is Rosan Smits. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Dutch The Correspondent, which is an online member-driven journalism platform. And in the Netherlands, we have over 60,000 members. And last year, we had a crowdfunding campaign for an English The Correspondent, and roughly 50,000 members from all over the world have joined us. We will start publishing in September, by the way. So we are an ad-free platform, and our entire business model is built around the idea of membership, and that has consequences, both for our financial considerations as well as for our editorial decisions. So I'll talk you through some of those considerations. It's good to know that over 90% of our revenue comes from membership fees and book sales. Thank you. Our members join us because they believe in our cause to redefine what journalism is about, how we make it, and how we fund it. So we try to do things differently and try to stay independent to do so, to do that with our members. So first of all, what news is about, we adhere to a different definition of news. So instead of telling you what happened today, we cover what happens every day, and thereby we try to shift the focus from the sensational and the exception to the foundational and the rule. And now that we're expanding into the English language, we're hoping to get even better equipped to do so. Take, for example, climate change, mobility, kleptocracy, privacy. These are all factors, systems that shape the world we live in. But how these work out locally differs per context. And with the help of our members in over 130 countries, we hope to get a better picture of the local implications of the works of these transnational powers. So secondly, we try to redefine how news is being made, and there the membership is also key. Our journalists set their own journalistic agenda, so they don't follow any news cycle, they don't get assignments from editors, from me, but their agenda is informed by a need from within, so by almost an obsession to know what's actually happening in the world around us. So for example, our privacy correspondent in the Netherlands is very worried about what he calls the most endangered human right of our times, privacy. And our mobility correspondent, she lies awake thinking about the 2 airplanes worth of people who die in European road traffic every week, and all we talk about is how to build new roads. So they have a mission, and we ask them to articulate that mission. Those mission statements are always investigative in nature, but have no sense of false neutrality. So we ask from our correspondents to share their worldviews, their motivations, also the gaps in their knowledge. So basically they tell the reader where they are coming from. And why do they do that? First of all, to build up this relation with the members who follow them. Basically, they keep a public notebook, we always say. So we do publish finished stories, but not only that, we also publish interim updates, newsletters, etc., making it possible for members to tap into that research and to help join the investigation. Our correspondents do this work because they believe that they can change things. So they don't only tell you what is wrong with the world, but also what can be done about it. For example, we had last year we had a major investigation on one of those fitness apps, Polar. It turned out that through this app you could reveal the identity and home addresses of secret agents, as well as people, soldiers who had participated in the bombing of ISIS. So that was quite a security risk. Our correspondents who revealed that first reached out, of course, to the Ministry of Defense to make sure that they could take measures to make sure that no one got in danger when we published. But we also published a self-defense guide for our members using those sports apps. So what can you do if you are running with your watch? Making sure that no one can follow you. But most importantly, our members, they are key in our journalism. So we consider them contributing experts instead of a target audience. They enrich our journalism by actively sharing their experiences and their knowledge. So for example, they help to gather information, to process it. If we have large data sets, they help to clean up those. They even build special websites and tools for us to do so. They respond to and enrich our publications as verified experts so that everybody can see that they are actually knowing what they are talking about. They join private events such as hackathons, brainstorms. They advise even on company policies, for example, on how we can reduce our carbon footprint. We aim to be a green company. They proofread articles, translate them, and sometimes they even become writers themselves. This is all to say that I think the relationship between a journalist and its followers is key for a basis of trust. And I think that trust is key for retainment in the end. So we've been working with this model over the past 5 years, and when we started it, we had no idea what we got ourselves into. But here are some of the things that we've learned that I would like to share with you. First of all, membership is a cultural commitment. It really places the journalist at the heart of a public knowledge platform. Each journalist has to work out his or her own magic formula to work with this member engagement. They have to be very specific about what kind of input they need, otherwise they will just be flooded with information that's not necessarily useful. And they also have to be open, vulnerable about their doubts, about what they don't know. So it doesn't work for everybody. You really have to feel that membership can add to your journalism. Also, it works two ways. So a journalist needs to adjust his or her methods, but also readers need to adjust their expectations. They're not buying a product, they're getting themselves into this knowledge platform. So they need to be trained into journalism membership. So as a company, you have to dedicate time and resources to onboarding the newcomers to your platform. That also requires new tools. So instead of a news site, we almost need a social knowledge platform. Instead of a database of subscribers, we need a Rolodex in which we can find our members' expertise, etc. The list goes on and on and on. It requires new jobs. We have a conversation editor, a verification editor, an engagement editor, a membership director, and a membership support manager, who all work to facilitate this membership model. And finally, it requires financial transparency. I already said that 90% of our revenue comes from our members. And by sharing our financials, we want to show our members that we can't do this without them. We can't possibly do it without them. So we also know that our members, many members, support us precisely for this reason. They see independent journalism as a public good and want to be part of that. And by giving our members insight into what journalism actually costs to make, we think that's very important in an online information market that is dominated by the Googles and the Facebooks and their daughter companies, in which you can find information for free. Of course, you pay for it with your data, but it feeds the assumption that information is freely available. And we think that when our members know how much money it actually takes to pay an editorial staff, develop a platform, provide a solid support system, only then can they make a well-informed decision of whether our journalism is worthy of their trust and support. Finally, we introduced a pay-what-you-choose model. I think one of you already mentioned that it's not possible to pay for all those quality media, to pay the subscription fees for all those quality media out there. But we still value the expertise and the input from everybody who wants to join us. So by making it accessible for a large number of people across the globe, independent of their income, we hope to build our membership base from that angle.
Thanks, Rosan. Tom, we'll turn to you last before we start bouncing a few things around the panel and open up. A somewhat slightly older startup than the other startups on the table, The Economist.
Yes, I guess I'm here to represent an incumbent news organization with a sustainable business model. But I think it's probably worth explaining what the model is exactly, and it has changed in the last 10 years, subtly. I mean, ultimately, it is a subscription model. So I think the place to start is, what is the job that we do for our readers that they're prepared to pay us for? And in simple terms, what we do is they buy information from us. That's quite a straightforward transaction. And they buy it from us in a sort of medium agnostic way. But I think at the end of the day, what happens is they pay us money to save them time. And they're generally very time-poor people who can afford to pay our $200 or so subscription. And that's really what they're buying from us. And when people become long-term Economist readers, it's because they find the service that we offer indispensable, and it helps them stay on top of what's going on in a very efficient way, because we write everything in this very sort of concise and compact way. So for a long time, we just charged for a subscription, and then we gave subscribers full access to our website, which had a paywall on it, and we've moved the paywall around in various ways. Essentially, it's always been a metered paywall. We've never had everything online being free. For a while, we had like the last 3 months for free, and the archive was paywalled, and I said, isn't that the wrong way round? Because we want Google to be able to get to the archive, and we want people to pay us for the recent stuff. So then we flipped it round, and for the last sort of 10 years, we've had a metered paywall on everything, actually, but Google can get through and index it. And essentially, if you look at the way that our audience breaks down now, we introduced a new pricing model in 2012 where instead of just giving all the digital content to the print subscribers, which is what we were doing before, and in effect asking them to value the digital stuff that we were doing, and we knew there was going to be more of it in the future at $0, we switched to a new model. And the new model, I think when we introduced it, it was something like, well, the pricing now is, because the price has gone up since then, but it's basically $180 for print only, $180 for digital only, or $200 for both. And depending on how you account for that $20 in your head, you're either getting the print edition for $20 or the digital content for $20, or you can, like, you know, divide that $200 up if you want to. And ever since we introduced that pricing, it's been very, very consistent. Half the subscribers have taken the bundle, both. A quarter have taken digital only, and a quarter have taken print only. We've seen that in pretty much every market, and that's now rippled through the entire subscriber base. This makes it quite difficult to compare what we do with other people, because they say, oh, well, you've only got a quarter of your subscribers are pure, you know, digital only. You haven't done a very good job of moving people from print to digital. But actually, if you look at it, we've got 75% of our subscribers paying for digital. We've just also got 75% of them paying for print. And in fact, ABC allows us to count the bundle subscribers as both, you know, as two subscribers now. So our circulation has just jumped to about 1.7 million, which it hasn't really. It's still basically 1.2 million. The funny thing is the digital subscribers skew older than average, and the print-only subscribers skew younger than average. And this is because the print-only subscribers are generally students, and they want to be seen with the physical copy of The Economist. And Meghan Markle as well. You know, it doesn't hurt to be seen with The Economist. And then the digital-only subscribers skew older because they want to be able to make the type bigger on their iPads. So it's not what you'd expect, but it's great. Anyway, so since we introduced that model, we think that that has sort of changed the way. It's essentially it's a pricing agnostic model. Print only and digital only cost the same, and our prices are high enough that we can afford to be, you know, digital agnostic. Platform agnostic. And we sometimes say that, you know, print is just another device. And we've got to the point where, I mean, you know, the bulk of our revenue has, for most of the Economist history, come from our readers. We made, obviously, more money from advertising when advertising was good, so between about sort of the 1980s and 2008. And I think there were times when more than half our revenue was coming from advertising, but we never cut our prices, and I think that's the crucial thing. We're now at the point where about less than 15% of our revenue comes from straightforward display advertising. And we've been able to you know, see advertising go away and have a sustainable model because we've mostly relied on readers and we've kept our prices high. And we now have more journalists than ever in more bureaus than ever. So this seems to be a sustainable model. There seems to be a strong demand for what we do. But this model is unfortunately rather hard to adopt or switch to or switch back to if you've trained your readers that your content is either very cheap or free, which a lot of publishers did. If you look at the other news weeklies, they cut their subscription prices very heavily so that they could increase their circulation to like 3 or 4 million, which was great when they're getting most of their revenue from advertising, but it's now very difficult because they're finding it hard to raise their prices. However, I think it's generally quite a good sign that there does seem to be, you know, continuing demand for the kind of thing that we do. I think it's also good to see lots of other sort of reader-based models emerging, like membership, like what the Correspondent is doing, like what the Guardian is doing. It's good to see that, you know, that sort of much more straightforward transaction where the readers pay you to do the journalism in some form or another, and there aren't the third parties of the platforms and the advertisers and so on in there. It does make things much simpler. The other thing, just to finish, I would say that I'm kind of heartened by is if you look at studies, there have been a couple of studies that have found the same thing. I think Pew did one, and I think Kantar did the other. And they found that 25 to 34-year-olds, so the generation below me, so I grew up with the internet in the 90s when everything was free and everything was pirated and, you know, all the rest of it. The generation of 25 to 34s are far more inclined to pay for content, and this is a sort of Spotify effect or a Netflix effect. And in fact, if you ask them about news, they say that they're much more inclined to say that they have a duty to pay for news, and that it's sort of, you know, paying for news, this is a useful thing to do. And they're more likely to say that than older subscribers, which are, or older readers, or older consumers, which I find interesting. But if that's true, and they really are prepared to pay, then we've got a good future, those of us who rely on this sort of reader-supported model. The other thing I'd say is I think it's really important that journalists do understand the business models of the publishers where they work, and it's really quite surprising to me when they don't. And there was a famous occasion about 5 years ago when a journalist at The Guardian, who I won't name, was doing a documentary about ad blockers for Radio 4, for BBC Radio 4. And he was talking about how terrible this was for BuzzFeed's business model and all this sort of thing. And he went and interviewed people at BuzzFeed, and he went and talked to the people who made the ad blockers and said, isn't what you're doing immoral? And then he came and talked to me and said, what did I think about all of this and the future of ad-supported journalism on the internet? And I said, well, you do realise that's the business model of The Guardian. And he didn't. And it hadn't occurred to him that the tragedy that he was reporting on of ad blockers actually applied to the company where he worked, and this endangered like his pension and things like this. And I think, to some extent, there has been a sort of the sense at some news organisations that it's sort of inappropriate for journalists to that's sort of church and state. You shouldn't worry about that. Let the commercial people worry about that. And I think that's very dangerous. We all need to know how our models work. I think the digital startups are much more likely to be aware of this. But I think when journalists young people come and ask me and say, should I go into journalism? And I say, well, it's a bit of a dicey business, but if you're really motivated, you should. But when you go and choose a news organisation to work for, make sure you think they've got a sustainable business model. You can't, it's really important. You want them to still be there, you to still have a job. So I think this is something we all need to pay more attention to. But the good news is there are some sustainable business models out there.
Thanks, Tom. Maybe just two quick questions I'd like to hear people's thoughts on before we open it up. I think the first one is this: like, if you were to sort of encapsulate your offer to your readers from their point of view in one sentence. We heard it from Tom, right? So, prominent American editors may come along and say, what I offer you is a safeguard against democracy dying in darkness. And Tom instead offers, I will save you time. And that's why I reach for my credit card. But, I mean, Ritu, if you think about the Quint, I mean, if you were to sort of encapsulate in one sentence, what's the offer that the Quint makes to the reader? What's the value or the problem that you solve, the value you offer, the problem that you solve?
I think in the current environment in India where a lot of the media, especially mainstream and legacy media, has completely capitulated and is virtually becoming different forms of propaganda. Currently, just the ability to be independent and to be able to speak truth to power and to be critical and to be able to stand against all the forces that the state is imposing upon us and continue to be critical. I think just that, and I think the early encouragement that we've got through our membership model speaks to that, really.
Thank you. And Rosan, in one sentence, if I'm a potential correspondent member, what's the offer?
Well, you will get to understand the world around you slightly better. You will get terrific journalism, very in-depth, well-researched, and you'll become part of a knowledge network. In which you get to exchange your knowledge and experience with people from across the globe.
Thanks. So the other thing I thought, just quickly getting people's thoughts on, is this question that, in effect, Tom also alluded to towards the end, which is, if you put yourself in the shoes of rank-and-file journalists in your news organization, what's their role in ensuring, if any, in ensuring the sustainability of the company? I mean, I think we can all either remember or imagine meetings in which, annually the commercial leadership comes in and they talk to the newsroom and they say, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and it's all very sad. Various companies are eating our lunch. And then the meeting is over, and then the journalists go back to the desk, and they sit there sort of slightly depressed, and then they do the same thing as they did yesterday, because what the hell are they supposed to do? They weren't given any role or any actionable thing, any way in which they could take some ownership for their future and the prospect of the organization that they are working very hard for every day. So if you think about this from the point of view of your organizations, I mean, what is the role of the journalists, in, if any, in ensuring the business? Tom?
Well, I should say that as well as the transaction being, if you pay us, we'll save you time. We'll explain to you what's going on in the world every week in about 2 hours, if you give us about 2 hours. Some of our readers spend as many as 4 hours reading, but generally it's about 2 hours. And we promise to be a trusted filter on what's happening. So you can trust us to just pick the stuff that's really important and tell you what you need to know about it. And that, and then also another offer promise we make to readers is implicitly that we are the smartest guide to the forces shaping the future. So figure out what's going on in the world. You can trust us to kind of pick out what's happening, spot those trends for you. That model only works if readers trust us. If they really are delegating to us the job of filleting what's going on and making sense of it for them. And so the thing that we always say in the newsroom about this is, this is why it's very, very important that we get things right, and that when we get things wrong, we admit that we've got them wrong and we fix it as, right away. But the whole model falls apart if our readers no longer trust us. So that, I think, is what we sort of, that's the message that we send, and we emphasize that quite a lot. That there's no reason why this model is sustainable. If we make a big mistake and we get things wrong and we lose that trust, then literally the whole model rests on it. And so getting things right is central.
Rosan?
Yeah, I already said that membership is a cultural commitment. It goes to the heart of journalism. But also, in addition to that, trust, of course, is key. I would like to add to what Tom said. It's not only about getting things right. It's also about being transparent. Why you chose the topics? Why you were the filter that you actually were? So why you think things are important? Because even The Economist is not an objective filter, right? It has a certain worldview. And I think that goes for every single journalist. And be transparent about that is key for the trust.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. We are absolutely transparent. We say, as a liberal newspaper, a lot. Yeah.
But still, Tom, I mean, the choices made are very different, right? So Rosan described how at the Correspondent you're very expansive about the individual journalist, whereas, of course, famously at The Economist, going by the bylines of some of the columns, I'm reading people who are long dead, and I don't actually get to know anything about the individual writers in The Economist.
That's true, but I think the other thing is that we are trying to do different jobs for our readers, and our job is to be the desert island magazine, that if you only read one thing about what's going on in the world, you can read The Economist. So that does mean that the selection of the stories we do is driven by that, and whereas, you obviously do a different job for your readers, so the way you choose stories is different.
And as a Economist reader living in Brexit Britain, I suppose the mission of making sense of the world is an interesting one when the world doesn't make sense.
But tell me about it.
Ritu, tell us about the Quint. What's the role of your journalist in the business?
Okay, for the longest time, we didn't involve our journalists in the revenue aspect of our lives, but one of the things that we insisted, because we are very video driven, because video travels for us the most. I mean, much more than a text piece, and we are very multimedia. So I think in our first phase, the emphasis was more on reducing the cost of content creation, apart from, of course, the basics of get your rigors of journalism right and make it honest. Beyond that, the focus was, listen, you've got to learn how to shoot yourself, edit yourself, do your own graphics. Every journalist must know a certain degree of coding. You need to be able to understand when you're speaking to the lab team on, you want the special map or whatever, you need to have an understanding, because that helps you cut costs. But now with our new membership model, we're actually asking our journalists to speak with the readers and demonstrate what went into doing every story. So our journalists are now being asked to document when they're out on our field. For instance, right now we had a journalist out in the northeastern India documenting rat hole mining, which is at risk to his life because there's entire mafia there. So he documented the whole process and how difficult it was. Also the cost. So we are now being transparent about what it costs to travel to that remote area, days of staying, recruiting local stringers, what that cost, of course the cost to life, all of that. So we are now engaging with our readers. So our reporters are now engaging with our readers, but it's a shift that will take a while to come. The cultural commitment has to be ingrained into the DNA, because this is not something that they have been doing for a long time. But this is the conversation. The teams that are doing the citizen journalism and the team that's doing the fact checking is already constantly in touch. So our reporters who are working on fact checking actually shoot a video demonstrating how they use various tools to arrive at that particular video was fake, or there was a superimposition, or whatever it is that they're demonstrating. So this constantly reaching us, since we're now pivoting towards a membership model for revenue along with that.
Just to remind us when the Quint was founded, 2012, is that right? Or?
The Quint was founded in 2015 is when it was actually.
2015, and you already talk about it as a legacy company. It's really I think it illustrates the pace of change globally in the industry. Let's open it up for questions from the floor. Raise your hand. Please introduce yourself, ideally relatively short question or short speech disguised as a question, and ideally directed at one of the people at this end of the room. So I think there are roving mics. Please.
Thank you. This is fascinating. My question is for the Correspondent, Rosan. We, Internews, work with developing country partners that obviously don't have the resources of the people of the Netherlands. I'm curious how you think this model could either scale down to a small city in a developed country or to a developing country context in a middle-income environment. Like, would it work? What do you think would be the problems, challenges? Do you think there's any chance for it? Thank you.
That's a good question, actually. Well, I think it would definitely add something to the reporting from those countries, because it would open up like a whole bunch of expertise in regions that are not well covered by journalists. But whether the model would be sustainable, that I really don't know. I think we are trying to do it globally, meaning that people from countries that have more money pay more, and people from English-speaking countries that have less pay less. I think that could be a way of it working, but that's not really what you're referring to, right? You're referring to local or national initiatives. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, last week I was in the Republic of Georgia, and I met with 20 local media outlets all over the country, and none of them have experimented with any kind of subscription or membership or co-ownership or any type of model like that. They all say, the market's not ready, no one here will do that. And I say, well, do you have a Netflix subscription? And they say, yes, of course I do. I wouldn't want to watch that terrible pirated stuff that we have. I want the good quality. Well, don't you think your journalism is good quality? Well, yes, of course we do. So my question is, like, for a country of 3 million people where the GDP per capita is $4,000, do you think that you could fit this into a box that's at a smaller scale for a smaller audience with this scale to pay, based on ability to pay? Would it work like that? That was all. Maybe we don't know, but
no, I don't have the answer to that, but it's worth trying.
But you made it work in the Netherlands, which has the same population as several large cities. So I mean, the Netherlands has the same population as what, Greater London. I mean, so.
And also just, I mean, Malaysia, Kini in Malaysia, admittedly richer than Georgia and larger, but still a middle-income country, is building a very substantial reader revenue as part of their mix. I mean, I think sometimes we have to remember that people, you know, famously said, Arianna Huffington said, I think in 2012, that the paywall is dead, right? Basically the moment that the paywall sort of made its great sort of resurgence. Sometimes you're wrong about these things, right? It doesn't mean people will pay for anything or for everything or support everything, but it's worth trying, as you say, if people believe in the quality of the journalism. It's at least worth trying, asking people to support it. Let's get more questions or comments.
Hi, I'm Doreen Lewix, a researcher at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. And I read in the latest trend report from the Reuters Institute that there's a rise in paywall blockers. And my question to you is, from your point of view, and it's to the whole panel, why is this number rising? And at the same time, how can news organizations avoid that we create the same situation with ad blockers, where it's again a very one-on-one against struggle to either fill the reader's needs or fill the publisher's needs?
I mean,
I think both ad blockers and paywalls don't have to be entirely effective to work. So I won't go as far as to say they're theatre, because they're not, but I think you can tolerate a certain amount of, I think, what do retailers call it, leakage or wastage or something? Because really what you're doing is reminding people who, when they make the effort to, you know, and I use an ad blocker, but I do turn it off for some sites, because sometimes you can't get to things, and so fine, I'll just turn it off for those sites, and they can have a bit of ad revenue. So I think. So I think really the paywalls don't have to be perfectly effective to send the message to people that, hey, we want people, we expect people to pay for this, and some people will take that message. And you know, some paywalls have been very easy to get around for a very long time, but it doesn't seem to have been a bad thing for the publishers in question.
I mean, I would only add to it that I think sometimes, as challenges as these are for publishers, it's also worth asking ourselves the question sometimes, why do people install these things? And sometimes it's a sign of a really, really poor user experience. If we think about ad blocking, I mean, why do people use them? Fundamentally, they use them because a lot of sites are loaded with crap advertising that takes forever to load, and that's really annoying, and it's a bad experience. And I suppose I personally think that's quite thought-provoking from the point of view of publishers. If you invest in quality journalism and then load it down with very low CPM, generic, quite bloated advertising, are you serving your own sort of long-term interest well, or not, perhaps? And should you perhaps think about why people are trying to avoid the things you're trying to force upon them?
I have a table here. So, my name is Carolina Guerrero. I work with Radio Ambulante. It's a Spanish language podcast that is distributed by NPR in New York. We're based in New York, but it's a Latin American project. This is not, I mean, I have like this, so we have it's a podcast, it's a weekly podcast, it's long form, and we publish 40 episodes per year. And the project is very successful, and we have a growing global audience. We have like 5 million downloads every year, and we have found a sustainable business model. The question that I have is that we have like supporters every month, but I'm very doubtful about, I have many doubts about the membership program that we're thinking if we should implement or not, because I feel that Radio Ambulante is a unique project serving a very unique underserved audience, but still I think it's important, but my audience is still mostly Latinos in the US, 70% of them are in the US. They still need to pay schools, read the New York Times, you know, like they have other needs that I feel that our responsibility is still to, I don't want to put all the burden of the responsibility of like sustaining my journalistic project on my audience, because I think if something happens, it can just disappear, no? So I want to have a right balance between membership, something that I can sustain or not. But my question is, how can I balance like a membership program that doesn't like take so much of infrastructure for our part? And do you think there is another way to, like, that is not only membership programs? For example, we have a lot of like Spanish learners, so we're creating an app for that audience that is important, and they're gonna pay for that, but it's not part of the membership, it's just like a service.
I think there's podcasting is fascinating because the production cost of podcasts is much lower than for video, and the advertising revenue is really good. And we do a lot of podcasts, and they pay for themselves. We actually make profit from them, but they also act as a really, really good way for us to introduce our journalism to new readers, particularly in the US, where the kind of people who listen to podcasts are exactly the same kind of people who are inclined to subscribe to The Economist. The exciting thing is that the platforms for premium podcasts are emerging and getting much better. So Slate has got this supporting cast one, and there are other, similar sort of premium podcast things in the works that I've heard of. And there's then a very, very clear model for this sort of thing that you're talking about, which is that you have sponsors and advertisers, which means that you have a free tier of people who get that show, and then you do a bonus show like Slate does with, say, Slow Burn, and the subscribers get that bonus show. And the Slow Burn audience is so fanatical that a lot of them will subscribe to Slate just to get the bonus episodes of Slow Burn. It's a very effective conversion tool for them. And of course, then they're actually subscribing to the whole of Slate's journalistic output. So I think you can do this now with Slate's platform, and there are other platforms in the works that would allow you to have a membership tier where you would not have to administer any technology, and you would be able to have some of your readers pay you more to get the behind the scenes or the extra episode or whatever it is. And the other thing I would just say is, if you're thinking that making a language learning app is going to be a money spinner, don't do it, because apps are a complete nightmare. They cost a fortune to just, even to keep them standing still, because you have to update them twice a year for all the so I just wouldn't go near that model.
It's gonna launch in like a few weeks.
Oh no, oh no, oh god, because you're up against Duolingo. I mean, you're up against a lot of very good free products there. So, but I think the premium podcast model is already established, and it's going to get easier and easier for people to implement that because the podcast distribution platforms are baking it in. So I would do that.
Maybe, if I may add to that, if you want to pursue a membership model, you really have to think through what that membership actually means. It's more than having people to buy your product, your podcast, right? What do you expect members to contribute to your podcast, for example? We know from our own research that none of our members wants exclusivity. So they don't care if we share our journalism for free, which we do. We don't have a paywall. They want to contribute to something that they feel is very important and valid. And I can imagine with this community that is very underserviced, I would say. There is a case to be made for membership, but you really have to think it through. It's not only about financial sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. Is that the management of those like human resources that want to volunteer is hard, I guess.
I guess I'm curious about your perspective on this, Ritu. I think in a other conversation around this sort of broad issue of the future of the business of news, a bunch of people sort of broadly came to the conclusion everyone is looking for diverse business models, but everyone also have to make the decision about what are you most? Are you most an advertising supported model? Are you most a reader revenue model? Are you most a membership based model? And I suppose in some ways both Tom and Rosan represent organizations that have a clear most and then perhaps also auxiliary revenues, but there is a sort of a clear single focus. And at the Quint, you're trying to move from one type of model to quite a diverse set of different things. How do you think about this sort of portfolio?
I think it's too early for us to not to say that we're not that our focus is not ad revenue. I think it'll take a while and a lot of experimenting for us to substantially move towards the other models. But I think what is clear is that ad revenue is limited. Also because CPM rates, it's a market where a lot of much larger, much stronger legacy players have really brought their CPM rates down so low, and I don't know why, that it's very difficult for startups to come in and to hold a substantial rate, because unlike the reader, the advertiser doesn't care about how strong your journalism is. They only care, unfortunately, about reach and impressions and traffic and whether they get better value out of spending on you versus on a platform. So we would eventually, like I'm saying, a year from now, I would like to say that we've shifted our focus to reader revenue. We're hoping to make that shift.
We're being paced very closely by the staff and volunteers here, so I'll try to be obedient moderator, but maybe time for a last question, please.
Hi, my name is Frederick Fiu. I'm the editor of the Monday Note newsletter. My question is for Tom. Could you give us some metrics about the economics of The Economist? I mean, how many readers you have on your digital edition, the ARPU and everything? And also, with whom you duplicate, your readers duplicate with? Since you want to be a destination, ultimate destination publication, I assume they must be reading something else. I'd like to know about that.
Okay, so I think we overlap a lot with readers of the Wall Street Journal and the FT, although I'm not sure they open the Wall Street Journal or the FT a lot of days. I wonder if they have them delivered to their office and sort of look at the front and the back. And I think we also overlap a lot with, say, the New Yorker, which is a sort of left brain, right brain thing. I mean, I like to get on a plane with a copy of The Economist and a copy of The New Yorker. In terms of, I mean, I could give you it's all in our annual report, but it's essentially 1.2 million paying subscribers, which counts as 1.7 million because 500,000 of them are print and digital. And then the overall revenue of the group is about £360 million. Profits are £50 to £60 million a year. Other revenue comes from things like events, our B2B arm, the EIU, some sort of marketing services, et cetera, But I mean, I can give you chapter and verse on this afterwards. So why don't we take this offline? Because I think our time is up.
I mean, maybe one way then to wrap it up is to say, I think a clear takeaway from this panel is, and also from the questions, is that there's not one model, right? Everyone is looking for a way ahead that works for their editorial ambition, for the audience that they seek to serve, for the business environment in which they operate, and there is not a sort of a single blueprint everyone can just adopt. I think it's also clear that we know that the business that existed in the past doesn't exist anymore. Other entities solve the problems that the bundle of news solved. Entertainment is Netflix, sort of soft connectivity is Facebook, daily information about everyday life issues is Google, and if you buy things is Amazon or eBay. So a lot of what was in the bundle of the newspaper.
How to assemble IKEA furniture is YouTube.
Oh, I thought that the Economist. No? Okay, well, I clearly need, I'll cancel my subscription then. So clearly, the problems we have to solve and the value we have to create is different, right? And you know, the idea that, you know, you'll miss us when we're gone is not a business model. So we have to think about, you know, what is the role we seek in this? And even if you are one of those rare journalists who have absolute and complete confidence that the commercial leadership and commercial staff in your organization are exactly the right people to make these decisions on your behalf with no input from you, even if you are that rare journalist who really believe that they've got it figured out, the suit, and you shouldn't be part of that conversation, maybe just think about whether you have something to contribute and whether you want a role in this. And if you have less than complete confidence in whether the commercial leadership and commercial staff of your organization got it figured out, then maybe think about whether you and your colleagues should seek a role in this to ensure that there'll be the kind of independent professional journalism in the future that you are pursuing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rasmus. Amen. Hooray, we had a whole session where nobody said Google and Facebook should give us money so we can go back to the old days. Yay!
That's why I cut it off.
It's so rare.
And there are no taxpayers either. I mean, it's,